Um, Here we are, masters of LA's underground comics, and by the rafters, it does look a bit underground here. So, what we're going to start off with is Robert Williams, way back once upon a time before there were before there were actual comics on walls in art museums. That was back in the 1980s, a long time ago. Robert was working his paintings, and starting in the early 90s with the Museum of Modern Art's High and Low show and Mocha's Helter Skelter out here, for which Robert Williams was the whipping boy. Suddenly the art world took a turn, started noticing comics and actually getting on the walls. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're actually going to be focusing now on Robert's work in the underground comics. So this is all about comics. And a word about the word underground. As James was mentioning, we've had conversations about this, about various panels. And one of my big things that I wanted to make sure was included in the show was, there's so much talent locally. I said, okay, we got to do something LA based in terms of the programming. And so James responded with, okay, how about Masters of LA's Underground Comics? And immediately 4 people popped into my mind. You'll be seeing them in a second. And actually, Robert, why don't you come up? Okay, so there we go. Thing about Robert, Bob Crumb, one of the guys on the wall, credits Robert. Well, what he said was back when Bob was working his way out of his American Greetings phase, doing greeting cards and working on exploring unexplored territories, he said there were 2 underground comics artists that really pushed him over the edge and allowed him to do the kind of work that he's become known for. It's S. Clay Wilson and the person you see at the end of the dais here, Robert Williams. And so then next up, we have the Hernandez brothers. We have spinning up there on the left side is Jaime, and tape over his mouth is Gilbert, and we'll find out a little bit about what's going on with them in a minute, why the tape. But Jaime and Gilbert, join us. Now, thing about these guys is that once I got the okay, and James was quick to agree that the four people that we have here are the people to be on the panel. But then I started saying, well, what about the title? I mean, underground comics. We got these guys whose books are available Barnes and Noble and Amazon. They're these huge, humongous cinder block weight books that are selling for gazillions of dollars, and so it's kind of hard to call them underground. How about changing the title a little bit here? And anyway, back and forth. Turns out that seems that underground comics is more of a catchy term. So those of you who feel you've been brought here under false pretenses, I guess you can just ask for your whatever you paid to get in here back. But and then next we have Carol Lay. For those of you who haven't seen Carol's work, all you have to do is pick up the LA Weekly every week, and the LA Week, our fine free weekly publication that treats the comics page with such respect. In fact, if you open up the paper that recently came out, full spread, you would get to see this. There's their comics page. strategically positioned way in the back there. And if you take a look, here's actually the comics page, which if you focus on it, you can see it's a huge kind of Barry Lay sandwich on Millionaire Kaz bread there. And one thing that you'll notice if you're trying to figure out which comic strip is Carol's, just look at the four and try to imagine, say to yourself, which one is the least looking like Underground Comics, and that's hers. Okay, now got to start out, set the scene for the Underground with Robert, who actually you're going to be able to, once you hear him, you're going to realize that he's not a native. You're going to be able to tell by the twang that we got some Southwest in here. He's actually born in Albuquerque, but he did come out here, go to LACC, and wound up starting out working for Ed Big Daddy Roth, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his job with that company. He working on these ads, where, as you can see, you can get yourself a Rebel Chevy T-shirt, and down the lower left corner there's a surfer's helmet for $1.98 that would be the pride of any stormtrooper in Redondo Beach. So Robert, set the scene for us on the LA underground comic scene.
Okay, thank you, Michael, and I want to thank the other people here at Hammer that put this thing together. And I think it's really a wonderful commentary that y'all would think up the idea of having an underground panel here. And the fact that we've got comics in an art museum is a phenomenon unto itself. The best place for me to start, I guess, was working for Ed Roth. I had a formal art education at Los Angeles City College in Chenards, and then tried to get a job in the fine arts, and had a number of problems. I came into the arts at the age of 20 years old under the impression that my influences would be the situations that I could apply to my art. And I was under a big misconception, because when I entered the art world in 1963, it was totally dominated by abstract expressionism. So representational art was out, and it has been out for 50 years now. So I found other venues and avenues to take in doing representational art, and one of them was being a rat fink artist for Ed Big Daddy Roth and whatnot. While I was working for Ed Roth, I met Ed Roth's competitor, a fellow named Stanley Mouse out of Detroit. And Stanley Mouse was very instrumental in starting the psychedelic poster movement in 1966. He was part of what was called the Big Five poster movement. And through meeting him, I met Rick Griffin and a number of underground cartoonists. And eventually I met Gilbert Shelton and Robert Crumb. And on issue number 4 of Zap Comix in late '68, I was invited into Zap Comix. Now, let me see if I can set the stage here for LA art. Now, I was one of the first 10 underground cartoonists, underground comic book artists, period. Now, prior to this, there were underground cartoonists. And there was a very famous underground cartoonist in Los Angeles named Ron Cobb. And there's also another fellow named Eddie Bedaus. And they did work specifically for the LA Free Press. So the groundwork had been set in many, many different ways for underground comics. The psychedelic rock posters are already starting to break their picture planes up into cartoon panels, and it was edging toward comics. If Robert Crumb had not been born, I'm sure Gilbert Shelton or someone else would have picked up the baton. It was just coming. There was 3 factors that brought about underground comics that I can make an observation on. The first factor was an enormous drug culture that came out of the 1950s into the 1960s. And I'm not talking about hippies. I'm talking about something that worked its way out of the bohemian beatnik world. I was involved in this culture in the late 50s and early 60s, and let me tell you, it was a growing phenomenon. That was a real backbone to underground comics, was this psychedelic world that just blossomed up in the late 60s. The second factor that brought about underground comics was there was an enormous amount of artists and comic book fans that were really vengeful against the outlawing of certain comic books in the early 50s. The early 50s, there was a Senate investigation that said that comic books were creating juvenile delinquency and deteriorating the young people. Exactly like today they're talking about video games. It was the exact same force of energy that was applied on comic books. So a lot of the very, very good comic books were completely run out of business. And this included an entire set of comic books called entertainment comic books, ECs. And the only thing that survived EC comic books was a comic book called Mad, and it went into magazine form, and that's how it seemed to survive. And the third element that brought about underground comics was the Vietnam War. And I don't know what the average age here is in this room, but prior to the end of the Vietnam War, every young male was subject to the draft. And this is the way it was clear back to the beginning of the Second World War. Every young man from 18 to 35 was subject to the military draft. So every male had to adjust his life to that 2 years he had to go into service. So this was really disruptive. And when the Vietnam War came, and it didn't have like a logical reason really to go fight, it was just based on the Gulf of Tonkin resolution about a shootout they say didn't happen. These other two elements, especially the drug culture, this giant bohemian culture that developed, really created a front, and out of this social soup, underground comics developed. Now,
Just talk a little bit about your own comic. Like, I think this is the first one that you did entirely yourself, the Coochie Cootie
yeah.
comic.
Yeah.
You want to frame that up for us?
Well, I had an audience, and I needed money, and I whipped this comic book out, you know.
Cut and dried.
So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you about it.
Well,
you know, it was questionable material, extremely questionable material. I created a cartoon character named Coochie Cootie, and you know. Let me dominate for just 5 more minutes, okay?
Then we'll cut your mic off.
You know, when you know, people now, when they look at an occupation or a career or something, and are they getting into show business or anything with dealing with the general public? They think of popularism and going for the largest audience possible. But this was not the case with underground comics when it started, because we belonged to a small group of bohemians that wanted to cater to a certain arcane audience. And people can't understand that about comics now. They can't understand how could people like Robert Crumb, they got so famous, really his central thrust was just for a certain group of intelligent people, or people who are on drugs, or people that like the comics, see? That none of us, absolutely none of us, was looking for that big audience, because we were considered very, very antisocial. And during the Vietnam War, there was a time that the artists in Zap were looking like that they might be marched off to an internment camp. And it was later in the 60s when the United States and the public swung behind the anti-war movement that things kind of cooled off for us. I'll turn this over to someone else now.
Well, we got... let's see, just one other LA area artist might mention, Rick Griffin. This was a tribute page you did shortly after his death.
You're right. One of the reasons I got into Zap Comix was that Rick Griffin was such a bohemian that he would just disappear for months. So they needed what was called another slick artist. So I filled that bill. And then later, Rick got a hold of himself and came back into Zap Comix.
Yeah,
Rick was a true bohemian.
It's interesting to note that they actually, the people that were putting Zap together were actually conscious of wanting to have a particular spread. Like there were some of the comics artists were more interested in its literary form. You were more interested in the visual form.
I'm glad you brought this up. When the comic book started, they weren't responsible to a comic book format. Now, it's hard for people to understand this. That the nature of the audience wasn't structured to where you had to have them formal comic books. These were psychedelic drug comic books that were experimental and bohemian. So what we did was the majority of us, or a lot of us, did stories that went from panel to panel that didn't relate to each other. So you're kind of put on a mental trip or a mental excursion. It was later that the comic book movement started formulating. In 70, 71, then Crumb and Gilbert Shelton, who were formal comic book artists, started tending to do much more structured stories. But there for a long time, the comic books were extremely erratic in subject matter.
Okay, and one of the erratic comics you worked on, the Yama Yama. I think this was back in the days when the punk comics,
this
Gary
punk
Panter
comic.
was starting up, and this was
And believe
either
me, this appealed to a real small arcane audience.
yeah, this was, and this was either your parody of the Gary Panter style, or you're hoping to jump on the bandwagon.
Well, I don't think we could have got on the bandwagon. You know, there wasn't like a bandwagon. There was like a bunch of
little go-karts.
loose kangaroos. But we saw this young artist and a couple others just taking off out of nowhere, and I know they were following the standards that we'd set down, and they're getting tremendous acclaim. So me and S. Clay Wilson did a small comic called Yama Yama the Ugly Head. And it was, well, what would be a word to describe? Chaotic and miasmic.
Chaotic and miasmic?
Yeah.
There you go. And then after that, you got settled down to what in this example actually looks like a more traditional, actually harking back to the EC comics style, and in terms of telling a story that's more narrative. This would be
you're right. This is more narrative, but on the other hand, it's has just as much psychosis in it.
Yeah.
Here, I'm trying to play on people's sensitive feelings and then just make it ridiculous.
Okay, and this was done back in the mid '80s,
Yeah.
and right around the 1980s, there was another early 1980s. There was another comic starting up, self-published. Gilbert, you've told the story of how Love and Rockets got itself started. But if you could paint a picture for us of, say, you and your brothers actually putting together this very first self-published issue, in terms of actually how you worked together, how you decided who got to have their art on the cover.
Well, it was basically a fanzine, the way mini comics are done now. Basically, just because you have a sheet of paper and ink, and you just and then you take it to a printer. We actually got some. My brother knew somebody that worked at a college that worked at the printing office, and we got that printed for about $700, which we borrowed from our little brother because we were broke. Well, we're cartoonists. I mean, we'd been drawing comics since we were kids, and this was the first time we had an opportunity to actually, have a relatively large print run, which was 1,000, and I think 800 came out.
And how were they distributed?
At first, we just carried them under our arms to conventions, and passed them out, and got There was some good responses, like, "Oh, this is cool. This is like an old underground comic or something." But mostly it was like, "You got to get a color cover. That's how you sell them." Well, and we kept the price $1 just because we figured that wouldn't scare people away at the time. It was a fanzine. We just had comics in our system, and we just did it for fun. We were thinking about the old days of in the '60s when they would publish fanzines that way, their own comics, and we didn't realize that was passé. We just did it because we could, really. We didn't really expect it to be as well received as it was right away. I mean, it got a good response, once people started to see it. And we sent a copy to Fantagraphics Books, because at the time they were only I think it was just the Comics Journal and a couple of other things, but since they were the meanest jerks in comics, we thought like we could take their their punishment, but at least we might get maybe a free review or something in it. But it turned out the opposite. They were really nice, and they were really encouraging. Just said, "Hey, we'll publish this
With a color cover.
I'm sorry.
With a color cover.
Yeah, with a color cover and added pages. I don't know why they wanted more pages to it, but no, you picked that picture, not me.
Well, okay. Lot of people know the Luba character as she is now, but for those of you who haven't seen her roots, do you want to
It was
explain yourself?
Leaning more toward underground comics, really. Just outrageous, wild science fiction, stories, and
Richard Corbin heavy metal kind of.
yeah.
a
Actually,
thing
I was just thinking of anything that as the kitchen sink and everything else, at the time. And it wasn't actually. It was when Jaime started working on his stuff with the Maggie and Hopi stories that the readers immediately responded to the characterization. As when we stopped doing the crazy stream of consciousness stuff and started to focus more on characterization and storylines.
Right, and she started out as a voodoo woman who wanted to take over the world.
Yeah,
and,
it was just like whatever I felt like at the time, And then she evolved into an actual character in my strips, and now is probably one of the best characters I've created.
Crazy stream of consciousness? Is that what you said? Hey, that's art.
Well, I meant the first issues. We weren't really, following any patterns other than what we had seen in underground comics. We're looking at that as patterns of what to put in it. And since those guys put everything in it, we thought,
Right.
that's the way you do it.
Okay, and it turns out back then you were doing what you thought the market might want, and then eventually you actually got around to doing what you want and found out there was a much better fit, much more of a reception.
Yeah, that and for me, just didn't have anything really serious to say. Just because I just like all kinds of comics, and I just threw in everything that I thought might work.
Okay, so you created these characters, and
It was the third issue of Love and Rockets when I decided to, take it seriously and do and challenge myself to do basically a serious dramatic piece. A lengthy piece. It was around 40 pages long, broken up into 2 issues. So I just, it was a challenge for myself to knock off the goofy stuff and just try to tell a story that might appeal to people who didn't read comics.
right, and to create these characters like Luba and Chelo and Carmen, who are quite three-dimensional in how you've actually presented them, thought them out.
Yeah, I was able to do that also is because, like I said, the response to Jaime's characters was so immediate that he was pretty much, they were following immediate, looking at his work, and I could do anything I wanted. So instead of me trying to be rude or crazy, continue doing that kind of thing, I took the high road and decided to do something serious because I could, So it was a gamble that paid off.
Riding on his coattails, yet going in your own direction.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, and the reception was such that you were actually at the beginning. Critical reception was comparing you to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Isabel Allende, and basically you were fairly surprised at this because you hadn't actually you weren't familiar with the work. But what I was wondering was, as all these accolades were coming in, did you actually pick up those books and start reading and possibly have them have them become like a retrospective influence to you?
Actually, it was around issue 13 or 14 of Love and Rockets when I decided, okay, let's see what they're talking about. They were always comparing the Garcia Marquez comparison, so I picked up 100 Years of Solitude. I read it, and I thought, oops, they're right, I'm psychic, but, I just have a feeling that we just have roughly the same background. I mean, Catholicism, enjoy folk tales and mixing it with reality, that kind of thing. It was. The thing was, after I read 100 Years of Solitude, though, I had to really force myself not to copy it, not to be too influenced by it. Try to go my own way. That was hard because it creeped in here and there.
Yeah. Well, numerous sources you were able to use, and certainly your creation of Palomar was your own, the Latin American country that you managed to create for your characters. I understand that the reason you created a fictional Latin American town rather than an actual one is so you could avoid having to do any research.
Well, that was a little bit of it. Actually, it was because I wanted to. I have a wild imagination. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to have strict guidelines to tell the stories. If I felt like doing a story about, frying imaginary slugs, I would do that. I don't know if anybody really does that in real life. But the challenge is to make it seem real within the stories. To create all these fantastic elements and put them in stories and make them seem real. And that's where I think the magic realism tag comes from.
Mm-hmm. And you're also very interested in art. You're in terms of experimentalism. This particular story is really like a study of the artist and how the artist interacts with society and what kind of real influence it has. You created this character and did a fairly lengthy story on the subject, and again, very very intricate, and actually with a quite an apocalyptic ending. You want to comment at all on that particular story?
It was just the story that came out of me at the time. I mean, I'd been doing the Palomar saga for a few years, and I just thought there was a point where I should finish. It was serialized, so I just felt I should have a big story that ends, and then I could take a break for a couple of issues and then start over if I chose to. And it just worked out. The stories fall together. The early stories, they were. I was still new at it, so I hadn't. I didn't have to repeat myself too much because I just hadn't done a lot of the things that I'd thought about in stories, and it was just a big, my big Marvel epic, without superheroes,
Right, and you also we're having little problems with the autobiographical stories around that time.
Yeah, at the time there was alternative comics, as we'll call them. We're leaning toward the autobiographical comic thing, and I just kind of got bored of it real quick. So I just did a sort of a parody on it that, like, well, if everybody's life's so interesting, I'll make up a life for myself, just it was
and end it.
Yeah, but it was just to have a story. We just, each issue of Love and Rockets comes up, and we just have to fill it with something, and I just put my personality into it. That's all.
And real quickly, you actually had some experience outside of your own work. Found out that didn't actually work out too well. You were handed over Mr. X, which wasn't your character. You and Jaime worked on that for a while. Mr. X, basically this guy who never slept and took a lot of drugs, and it was around the time when people were taking a lot of drugs to stay awake and get a lot of stuff done. It was the wonderful 1980s, and so the moral of that story is that you best stick with your own material. You worked on that for 4 issues. And
yeah, we were doing 11 Rockets at the time, and it was still new, and we weren't making a lot of money, and we needed a job, so we took this job, and actually it backfired on us because we made less money doing it than doing Love and Rockets. So
And you did the writing, and Jaime did the art, and actually you wound up trying to move it into your own area in terms of Mr. X, the guy with the title on the cover, became less important than the side characters.
yeah, 'cause at that time, that's the kind of stories we were writing. If we created a character and we felt like going somewhere else with other characters, and the main character would be sort of in the background, that was fine. But that didn't really work for Mr. X. They wanted him to be the next Batman or something.
Right.
That's not where we were at.
Okay, now over to your left, we have your art, and over to the right is Jaime's. You can deduce for yourself some of the differences in terms of approach, but way back, once upon a time, there was actually rockets in Love and Rockets, and this is back when Jaime was working in a what would you call it? Labored style. Let's say this particular. I mean, you started out wanting to deal with rocket ships, dinosaurs, and superheroes. In fact, you have the superhero here saying, "Marvel at my modest display of power," and but it actually turns out it's just a group of people reading a comic, or a person reading a comic strip. I noticed the arrow pointing to Maggie there. But yeah, could you talk about it a bit?
This story, this time when, you mean? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was still early on. This was issue 3, I think, when it was still kind of anything goes. And I just thought it would be fun to do my take on superheroes, and but throw Maggie in there to ruin it all, I mean, to spoil it. It was just a goof, it was still when Maggie could go anywhere, she was a mechanic, she could meet superheroes, she could go home to Hopi, it was just all up in the air. After a while, this stuff just wasn't as important to me.
Yeah.
It just, when I wanted her to get serious, it didn't look that serious if she was involved in this stuff, so, I don't know. This stuff was fun to do, and it brought in some readers who liked superheroes, I guess.
Right. Well, yeah. In this particular case, you could be accused of ripping off the Watchmen with the superhero on the skids there, Ultimax, except
This
that
is before Watchmen.
you did it 5 years before before Alan Moore
Yeah.
wrote the Watchmen.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah. And when I was doing, this was second issue, these are the days where I would just say, okay, what comes next? Day 16. And I would just start writing, and I say, I want to draw a big drawing of Maggie. And as simple as that, and then where's she going from there? And then she gets mad, throws a wrench. It's just all, it was a gas, and it still is for me. It's just in a different direction, I think some of the difference between our underground days and the first underground days is that we had no real war to protest, so we were just fighting mediocrity in comics, just correcting all the bad mistakes that they were doing in mainstream comics.
Yeah. And in terms of illustration style, you eventually cleaned things up. There's actually
Yeah.
the
This one-
contemporary Maggie.
Yeah, this one was a color story, so I think I was
Yes.
kind of dropping out lines and stuff like that, but
Sorry about that.
What?
the line's dropping out.
oh yeah, but at this time I was dropping out the lines. It was just my
Oh,
art-
okay. I thought it was a scan.
my art was just evolving, and the lines just didn't mean much, after a while. I just thought that less lines worked harder, to make the drawing come across.
Getting to a minimal style here. You have Hopi, Penny Century, just, run through the characters, and this is kind of a joke on that old story about how the characters kind of write themselves for you. This is actually the
Right.
characters planning on walking in and telling you how they want it to be written.
Right.
And up
Right.
until that point, been fairly lighthearted in your stories, and the turning point is with a character called Speedy, the death of Speedy, which is actually a character that you had created at the very beginning.
Mhm.
You eventually wound up killing off.
Yeah. I with that story, I felt like killing someone, and I wanted it to be someone you knew, because that would just make it all feel more real, or tug at your heartstrings, that kind of thing.
Yeah, this is a character created in '82. I think took him up through '85, and then in '87 you set him up for the fall.
Yeah, and sometimes I look back at the story and wonder if I should have done it. Like I didn't need to kill the guy. But it's I had fun doing the story, and it was at the time when Gilbert and I were really on a ride of just going gangbusters and like, oh boy, I'm gonna do this, and do that, and this story is probably held highest of anything I've done, which is what, 20 years old.
Okay, now Carol, hello.
Hi.
Here, we've run out of time, so here's your biography. Actually, just to take it up to the point where you were actually grew up in Orange County and had a variety of jobs and when you
I
were
gotta
starting
say
to get
that
on your own.
Orange County was so boring that it made my imagination grow. I mean, I was hysterical as a teenager, and I had to get out. So when I moved to LA to go to UCLA, it was like, okay, great. I started meeting people who listened to good music and took drugs and sex and all that stuff, So I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No. It's all about you. This is actually a T-shirt you created on your own at the time. One
I
of your early.
apologize for this color. It's all washed out. Yeah, that was a hot seller. Paid the rent for quite a while.
Until there was a threatened lawsuit.
Yeah, they actually came after me with 26 lawyers, and I had one free lawyer, and he said roll over, so I did.
Okay.
And I regret that now because it's a legitimate parody. It's they wouldn't have stood a chance except that they had more money.
Okay. And people started taking note of you as a comic artist when your work appeared in the Church of the Subgeniuses Stark Fist of Removal magazine with a character called Irene.
She came out of I had a fight with a boyfriend, and I read a collection of DC romance comics called Heartthrobs. And the only story I liked in that was the one that had a sad ending. And at the same time, that boyfriend had shown me a Hustler magazine with a picture of 3 Ubangi women in it. And the two things collided, and I came up with Irene, who's fabulously wealthy but has that face, so it just makes for a lot of romance problems.
She looks hot, though.
Oh, she's gotten hotter over the years. and I was also working for Western Publishing doing Donald Duck comics, inking those for a living, and that had something to do with the reason her lip disc was so big and duck-like in the beginning, I'm sure.
Okay.
And this is a page from Ron Turner said he's going to do a Irene collection, so I did some new material. She's actually aged. It's um, you know, it's been a few years since the last Irene story, so things have changed, and she has a family now, and you know, it's still the same kind of absurdist problems. You know, like there's no, well, there is a touch of magical surrealism in these stories, but mostly I like to keep it based in reality and then goof on it.
Okay. And there was some experimentation with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a night when I dropped some acid and went to one of Ray Zone's little events, and it was all about just spontaneously drawing things and just being as you know, from the mind into the pen, and expressing, you know, how fucked up I was on that drug. I had a good time that night, you know, and turned it into a story.
Okay. And speaking of drugs, Fear of Frying was actually done for Cocaine Comics.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, I was reading up on Charles Fort, and all these people were, you know, these stories about people spontaneously combusting. So I thought that would be fun to illustrate. And the last panel, I don't know if you have the second page there, but I just made one up. And nobody noticed. Since then, I've found out that spontaneous combustion is not magical. There is an explanation for it, but, you know, at the time, I didn't know, so it was fun to draw.
And one thing I think the audience will have noticed was the different sort of styles that you've been working on. You've
Oh,
got
the dots drove me nuts. And then coincidentally, that same boyfriend at the time had a fire in his apartment, and I sort of felt responsible. So he gave me his cat clock, which had melted in the fire, and it was all blistery, and I hung it in my kitchen. And then I had a fire after I did my cat clock painting, and it was just sort of, we passed that flaming baton along.
Flaming Baton. Okay, and you got a little bit into autobiography, although you did change your name for a trip back to a family wedding. That
I was so ashamed of this story. I thought my parents were going to see it and hate me forever. But so I chose the name Cora Lloyd, which means, you know, something that's passive and things just kind of float by it and feed it. But Robert Crumb got me to do this story for Weirdo number 10. I had been wanting to do something for Weirdo, which is kind of the tail end of underground comics. And he and I had been telling so many people about this horrible story with these in-laws that my brother had. I mean, there was this fence barrier in this little Midwestern town that had on it the number of the beast is 666, and he is among us. And I couldn't believe how out of place I was in this town. So I was telling the story to so many people, and he suggested I do something autobiographical. And this came out, and then I was able to quit telling the story. That's the one thing, great thing about comics is, you know, it's cheaper than therapy.
a moral for somebody to take away. You were also in Art Spiegelman's Raw magazine.
Briefly.
What was the experience after having worked for other comics editors, actually working with Spiegelman for Raw?
Art is very style oriented, where somebody like Crumb is content. You know, he and I sort of prefer the content over style. I like the reporting aspect. I did a few pieces for the New Yorker in the Talk of the Town section, because I'm very shy, and it's nice to have an excuse to walk up to anybody and ask them questions, you know, and so that was fun.
Okay. And this was a little reporting you did on your own.
Well, that was a Robert Williams opening over at La Luce, and yeah, you know, that guy was just about to burn one of Robert's paintings, and I hit his arm, and it turned out to be kind of a scary guy. So, and then Robert told me about Lydia Lunch almost shoving Axl Rose down the stairway. So that was fun to draw, even though I didn't see it.
Okay, and your more recent strips that you do, they don't always necessarily have a ha-ha punchline.
No, I got kind of political for a while. And this I came up with a day or two before the war started in Iraq. It just really pissed me off.
Okay, and you're you also you have a very lighthearted style that you're working in now. Yet there is a certain morbid sensibility that contrasts nicely with your clean, happy line that some people have called cute. I think that was.
I'm very good at doing cute, yeah. Not
Okay.
proud of it, but
Okay. Okay. Just to talk about sex a little bit here. Your strips are fairly restrained. This backdoor girl is one that's more suggestive than anything else. It still manages to make the point without being explicit. Although you have gone into, in the case of this story here, you have gone into a little more explicit style, in which even if you don't read it, just by looking at the images, you can. It doesn't look like things turned out very well here. Do you want to mention anything about how you feel? I know that you're more focused on the love aspect, relationship aspect, than actual sex in terms of portrayal in your work. So
yeah, I'm not a pornographer, but you know, if sex
However,
is
there
part
was-
of the story, then it is of interest to me.
I came across this one I was curious about.
I don't know why I threw that in. You know, I like drawing girls. You know.
Oh, I think you have something in common with the other three people
Yeah.
on the panel. They're nodding there. Jaime, you're also fairly reserved in your portrayal, and you kind of in scenes like this, you seem more kind of interested in showing that you've actually there's one of your albums on the floor of the place, and
Yeah.
and I think that this is one of the more explicit scenes, and it's still fairly reserved. Is that something that you're deliberately conscious about, restraining yourself in your portrayal?
No, I don't know. It comes out. It comes out the way it does, just the way I write stories. You know, I mean, I think about what I want to do, and then it comes out how I do it. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. All I know is that I'm gonna have a certain scene, and then it comes out. You know, and the way it comes out. You know, I don't know.
Okay, and Gilbert was fairly reserved, but he did go a little bit whole hog when he was given the comic Birdland to do. Gilbert was.
I don't think it was given to him. I think he took it.
Okay, so do you consider yourself a pornographer?
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's porn. There's,
show.
yeah, it's just, I don't know. They, whenever there was sex comics, it was a lot of it was, you know, like a story with a lot of sex and then violence and this and that. But when I just said try to take the energy of the violence and just put it into the sex and just have the crazy fun sex comic. And I don't know, things were conservative at the time. I think it was during Bush 1 when I did this. And I don't know, it was just something to do, just to break free, just to, you know, flex my, you know, arm, because nobody else was doing it at the time. And I had such a do-gooder reputation at the time. It was time to spoil it.
Time to tarnish it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you have a ways to go with Robert Williams at work. This was a comic he did back in the, oh God, the colors are terrible here. Look fine here. Anyway, be that as it may, Felch Comics. This was something that you actually came up with after a discussion about.
I'll answer for this. In the late 60s, when we were doing Zap Comix, we started doing little bitty comics that were like really filthy. Like S. Clay Wilson was the first guy to like really open the door to erotic nonsense. And the stuff wasn't like something you could like masturbate to, like masturbatorial fantasies. It was just so sexually ridiculous that it just went into an abstract world, and we just really enjoyed that. So we did a bunch of small little comics. There was one called Jizz, and there was 3 called Snatch, and they were like the kind of comics they sold under the counter, like extremely ridiculously filthy. So I was talking to Wilson and Crum and these guys at one of our well-known parties, and Wilson says, well, I just talked to Ken Weaver of the Fugs, and he had this real weird word. You got to hear this word. I said, what is it? And he says, it's a felch. I said, well, what's that mean? He says, I'm not going to try to see if I can do this without using a dirty word. It's a sexual act of withdrawing the semen out of someone's lower digestive tract after they've had anal intercourse. Mm-hmm. And it's a real word. It goes way back into time. And I said,
actually, they could use that illustration in the dictionary.
So I said, well, that's our next comic. We'll do a whole comic about felching. So Crum says, I'm up for it. We're all up for it, you know. So we all just got excited and wanted to do our interpretation of felching, see. So let me tell a little anecdote about this. So anyway, a little while passed, a year or two passed, and there's a fellow named George DiCaprio that used to distribute all the comic books in the LA area, and he was the father of Leonardo DiCaprio. And so he would go around to the head shops and whoever would take these publications and distribute underground comics. So down in Long Beach, there was a bust. The police arrested this news dealer. What the police would do was they would bust the poor bastard that worked the counter, see? And the owner of the shop, it was his responsibility to bail a guy out and go defend the thing in court. But the poor guy that's just working the counter there, he's the one that takes it. So anyway, George DiCaprio got a lawyer, and he went down there to defend this guy, and he went down to for a hearing, and they were outside the DA's office in Long Beach, and there's George and this poor guy that got arrested, and the owner of the bookstore, and this lawyer, and they're sitting outside the judge's chambers, and the prosecuting attorney is in there with the judge. And apparently what they did was they just grounded up a whole bunch of comics, and then they went through it, and they says, well, man, look at this Felch. We got him. So a period of time passed, and I would imagine that someone come along, and some cop come along, and was digging through there, and he goes, oh, they won't miss me taking this one. And that was that Felch. So the judge and the prosecuting attorney is going through this box of underground comics, And George said all he could hear through the judge's door there was, well, where's the felch? Where's the felch at? Well, you said there's a felch in here. Well, where's that at? You know? So, so they couldn't find the felch, and they dropped the charges. So it's the end of my felch story.
Okay. Now,
Okay.
I'm sure you.
This is one of the pages out on those little dirty comics.
Right. That was from Felchin.
Now, I can stand here, I can sit here with a straight face and endure anything I've done as a young man here, because this was done in a period of, oh my God, this was done in a period, this was done in a period of time when we were actually creating culture. If we hadn't have done these dirty funny books, then you couldn't use four-letter words in public, see? We moved culture. You don't understand that before the Vietnam War, the culture that we lived in was just like it was back in the 20s. You know, it was a very strict, tight-ass world we lived in until these goofy hippies come along and loosen things up.
Okay. We won't be introducing Carol Lay's Backdoor Girl to Backdoor Bert, but what I'd like.
I preceded her here with my character. This was an animated character for a full-length Zap Comix movie that never went into production. Here's some of the storyboards that went along with it.
Yeah.
This never reached fruition.
Yeah. Now you would think hanging around the Hollywood people, you know, you could maybe get Nick's here and say, hey, you know, we get we go and we get Pixar in on this Coochie Cootie the movie, and you know, just wouldn't Nick Cage be great to do the voice of the character?
Well, at the time, this was 1970, a lot of studios were extremely interested in this, and they took it serious. But the problem was that it would take 2 years to produce this thing, and all of were wondering, what is the temperament of the country going to be in 2 years after you do some stuff like this? You know, we don't want to bankroll a big thing like this and discover the country is turned into fundamentalists or something.
Now, in terms of, there are recently there have been independent alternative comics being made into movies, and Gilbert and Jaime, I mean, just between you and me, don't you really hate Dan Clowes? I mean, I mean, actually, no. You guys have been approached for movie deals before, and it's pretty much the runaround sort of deal.
Oh yeah, for years, for many years.
And
a lot of promises, you know.
Nothing to fruition. They're usually hooking up. They're saying that Selma Hayek would make the perfect Luba and that sort of thing.
Well, that's actually the best choice that we've heard compared to the ones before. Let me tell you, Winona Ryder is Hopi. We ran screaming from the studio.
Okay, and I'd like to open it up with questions from the audience right now. But before I do that, I'd like to take a second, if I could, to actually show. Okay. Comment on that, Carol?
I'm sorry?
Uh,
That's actually an animatic, you know, just meant to try to pitch an idea. It's not a finished product, and there's a couple more on my website, waylay.com.
Did you work for Hanna-Barbera? It was in one of your comics, or is that a joke? I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know your background.
Yes, I did. Back in the early 80s, I think.
But did you learn there, or what?
Oh, I was there for a very short time. It's just one of the many odd jobs I've had to do to support myself while I do the things I love, which is comics.
Thanks.
Hello, good evening. This is more of a comment, a little bit of a question for Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez. And I just wanted to say that I really like your comic book, Love and Rockets. I was introduced to it by a friend about a year ago. And then I was like, because at first I thought it was just the band. And then I realized it was like an actual graphic novel. And I really, really like it. I like the depiction of, you know, the strong women characters. They're very three-dimensional and they're not like objectified. And I really like that. And also in as well as Carol Lay's comic, you see a lot of like the political sort of criticisms, of all the, things against the war and things against mediocrity. And I really appreciate that in comics. And I wish there were a lot more of it, frankly, in the arts generally, but also in graphic novels and comics. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that. And the question is, are you thinking of restarting Love and Rockets, sort of 2006 question mark?
I mean, restarting Love and Rockets?
Yeah, continuing rather.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're still doing it. A lot of some readers who, when we finished with issue 50, thought we went away for good, and to this day, I get people coming up and saying, "What are you doing now?" So yes, we're still doing it, and still having fun with it.
Yeah, we started over with issue 1, volume 2, so we're on issue 16 right now. So it's in the stores.
This is for the brothers. If you guys did do a movie, who would you want to direct and star in, 11 Rockets or Heartbreak Super or any of those type of stories?
You.
We'll hold a contest. No, I don't know, me. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
We're still talking to people about who take making Love and Rockets movie seriously, and it's getting it's pretty good. We can't talk about it right now because it's in its infancy, but this is probably the best talks we've had about making a real movie, because so much time has passed since we were first being courted by movie people, and they just didn't know what to do with it. But now that so much time has passed and so much different kinds of movies have been made since then that are similar to Love and Rockets, I guess you could say. It's a little more realistic making a movie now. So.
And I was going to ask Carol, following up on that, because it seems like one sure way for actors and actresses, particularly actresses, to get nominations for Academy Awards is to somehow alter their looks and disfigure themselves. What about the Irene movie? Is there anyone who?
I've had a couple of people approach me, but that was years ago. That's another reason I want to get this book out. I'd love to see an Irene movie, and I have no idea who would be Irene. I used to think Christina Ricci would be good, but anyway.
Okay.
Well, I'm really enjoying this panel, and thank you all for being here. And I admire your work. I think it's very entertaining and provocative, but also I admire it because it's brave. And all of you didn't really open the door so much as actually create a door as far as underground comics goes, and I admire you for that, and please continue to do that. But my question is more about, it's a technical question. I know you started doing comics with brushes and ink and pencil, and I was wondering how technology, the internet, and any software programs may have changed the way you work and your productivity, or the way you look at the world.
I still have to dictate scripts to my wife, because when I'm writing a story, because I'll work with at DC Comics, I'm doing a project there, and you have to have a script ahead of time. Because in my own comics, I don't. I'll write it as I'm drawing it, and lettering it. But over there, you have to have a script first. So I don't know the first thing about computers, and so I dictate to my wife. But actually, that's a good system for me, because when you read the stuff out loud, you start to hear it. You hear it. You hear how it sounds, and I'll be rewriting it as I'm dictating it to her. So that's a good way to really write stories, write scripts, especially dialogue. But as far as computers go, that's the only thing I use it for.
I use a computer, pretty limited though, mostly for color. I still use the old utensils, but I scan everything in and use digital files to send to various papers. But I like doing color with the computer. It beats the hell out of carving ruby lith. And there was one image up there that probably took me 12 hours to do that. If I'd painted it, it would have taken me several weeks. So I do appreciate Photoshop.
Jaime, anything?
No, I still do it by hand. It's faster for me. It's easier. It's more personal. It's just me and the drawing board and the paper. And just turns out better. I mean, I've never really tried to do it on a computer, but I can't imagine where I'd start. But that's just the way I work.
Now, the interesting thing too is you imagine this sort of, the sort of shift as people do get more onto the computer. Just try to imagine in the future what a Masters of American Comics gallery show would look like, and you just everybody be queuing up to a monitor and trying to get the QuickTime movie to work. Just to, for a second, maybe talk a little bit about the work on display at the Masters show and how it's influenced some of you. Like, for example, Gasoline Alley. I know, I'm thinking here, obviously, of the approach that the fact that people in Love and Rockets tend to age. You see them in various incarnations, and I know the Hernandezes actually had a mother who was very kind, did not take away their comics, actually encouraged them, showed them the spirit and the rest of the comics, and was very much influenced your early sensibility. And say, want to speak about like the Frank King work upstairs in terms of how it relates to what you've been doing?
Yeah, well, for me, Gasoline Alley was a direct influence in that. I'd known about it when I was a kid. My older brother, Mario, he would collect books on the history of comics, right? And that was the only place I could see, a few panels of reprints of Gasoline Alley and the old, great comic strips. But they were very mysterious to me because I only knew, mainstream comics. But they had their own magic to them, their own pull that I was reading. I remember saying it said Gasoline Alley from 1920 or so, and had the uncle and the little foundling child talking, right? And I just looked at it like, okay, then they skipped forward so many years, and they had a man going through a midlife crisis, and he was lamenting getting, he goes, I'm turning 40 and this and that, and the woman is, telling him, well, that's okay, you got a life ahead of you, and I realized it hit, reading the caption at the bottom, I realized that the man that was talking was the little boy, the foundling in the original strip, and it just, at that, I must have been like, 11 years old, and that just blew my mind. That just made the mainstream comic, even back then, I loved mainstream comics, but that just made them so much inferior, just because of the potential of what I saw in Gasoline Alley. It was all projection. I hadn't read the strips. I thought the drawing was good. And I continued to see comic strips that way, the longevity and that the characters could age, particularly in Gasoline Alley. That was something I had in the back of my mind, for years, and that's that's why it was fairly easy for me to jump into Heartbreak Soup, the Palomar stories right away, because I'd been thinking about it since I was 11 years old, and I did it when I was 25. So I had plenty of time to think about what I would eventually like to do, and when I got the opportunity, I was prepared, and it was due to just having this fascination with old comic strips, really, more than any other kind of comics.
Yeah, I noticed you actually got Chester Gould's flat top in your splash page on the.
Well, I have a theory on that. I think that Chester Gould was doing a parody on Frida Kahlo back then, because she was actually very famous, coming over, to America and doing these gallery things. And I think he just did a cruel parody of her. Because if you look at her, the way I drew her from a photograph, and then the flat top character, there's all the similarities are there. The eyebrows and the thing and the expression. So I'm guessing. I don't know if that was that's real or not, but I suspect so.
And I know that when during the yeah, here we go. Usually in the interview they get around to asking you, hey, I hear you guys were interested in punk music, so hey, I hear you guys are interested. We're interested in punk music. Anyway, this is actually the Sex Peanuts.
Yeah. I don't know. I just did the Sex Pistols as Peanuts characters. I don't know. I just thought.
Yeah.
one of the-
And Jaime, the Peanuts characters to you, Charles Schultz, that helped you along in your
Yeah.
development?
Yeah, because when growing up, as much as I like drawing superheroes, I like drawing Peanuts type or Dance the Menace type kid comics, and I did a lot of those. And so when it came time to do kids in the comic, I just wanted them to move as naturally as possible, and that's the way I drew them my whole life. So I just decided to draw them that way, you know, and because I thought it would help their, I don't know, the childlike spirit, you know, and all that stuff. I don't know. It just seemed right, you know. I usually go with my gut instinct on these things, you know, and that's how they turned out. I mean, sizing them up against a realistic drawing is a little tricky, you know, but that's what the whole comic is, you know, using tricks to make people believe it's real.
Now, I know, Gilbert, when we were talking at the opening, you were fairly perturbed at some people who were saying that Jack Kirby shouldn't have been included in the show, and I found it interesting that both of you were very strongly influenced by Jack Kirby. There you can tell Jaime what he was up to in 1972, and although this seems odd since there's quite a difference in the dimensions you work in, but it's interesting that the reason that you were attracted to Kirby and you cite him as a strong influence is because of his subtlety. Jaime, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I grew up reading the Fantastic Four and Thor comics and stuff because it was everything was exploding, you know, all over the place. But when I got older, I remember looking back at them and seeing pictures of people wearing overcoats standing there talking, you know, and Kirby's just a natural artist. He could draw anything, and when he wanted them to just stand there, they just stood there, and I just fell in love with that at the time. I was a teenager, almost getting to the Love and Rocket stuff, but so I started looking for that in Kirby, and there's plenty of it if you look past all the explosions.
Yeah,
you know?
there's so much subtlety and so much real humanity in it's basically his drawing of people. Even though it became so abstract toward the end, you know, everything's square and round and just wacky. There's so much humanity in Kirby's work that just gets dismissed because of the bombast of the other stuff. You know, there's one of the at the Mocha show. There's a Kirby page of the X-Men, and they're like skating across the panel, the page. It's a really very gracefully done, very actually a sweet page of these sort of innocent, you know, teenagers with magic powers or whatever in these costumes. But he just captured so much humanity in that, more so than when I was looking at the fancies, the fancy stuff like the spirit pages. You know, that are very well designed and very beautiful, exciting, but you'll go to the Kirby stuff and there's more humanity in his art, and that gets dismissed or overlooked. And so for guys to be saying like, oh, I don't like the Kirby stuff because it's, you know, juvenile and stuff, and you know, it's a matter of opinion, but I just think maybe some of the pieces at the other show weren't as strong as Kirby's best stuff, but I think there would be no Marvel movies, no Marvel in this Marvel comics, in the, you know, if Kirby hadn't showed up, didn't, you know, get tired of DC and went over to Marvel, this whole superhero thing would have just been a wash. It would have been died with the undergrounds, you know. But he was so vital and such a great, just a skillful artist as well as somebody with a crazy imagination. He just basically, you know, built that company, and and nobody after him could match him because he was the original guy. He was the real guy with the crazy, you know, vision. There was good artists who, you know, aped him, but it never got as far as him. Anyway, I'm sticking up for Kirby because I heard a lot of squeaks about, you know, he doesn't belong there, and, you know, more Spiegelman. You know, I'm like, let's get some perspective here, huh?
Okay, I want to ask Carol about her early influence. As I believe that for you, George Harriman was really the um, strong part of your formative.
No.
No.
Growing up, I happened to miss all the good comics. I read the crappy ones, and it, and
I
so
take
I
that
never
question
got,
back then.
I never got hooked on them. You know, I'm one of the few people in comics that wasn't a fan as a kid. I mean, I read the daily papers, but and I liked Al Cap because of the imagination, and Ricochet because of the good drawing and things like that. But I read the, you know, I like to think I was a smart kid, so I was reading Classics Illustrated, and I happened to read The Oxbow Incident, which was probably the worst comic ever made, and I never read another comic until I got into college and read Zap. And there was a Captain Piscom's story with, you know, somebody with a dick as big as a loaf of bread getting it whacked off. And it's, wow, now this is comics, you know.
That's S. Clay
So,
Wilson did that one.
Yeah, and all the other Zap artists. That comic blew a hole in my head, you know, and I needed it.
Yeah.
But so it wasn't until I became an adult that I studied comics.
I see. So when you were putting together like your pantheon here of cartoon women, the olive oil in there may not necessarily have been the E.C. Segar olive. It just
Yeah, some of those are from childhood, like the Patchwork Girl from the Oz stories, and you know, Nancy Drew and Barbie, and the Betsy McCall cutout characters. And there's Mammy Yoakum and Brenda Starr, who I always thought was really weird. And I never did figure out Hank until years later. I always, you know, why is Hank a woman guy, you know, but.
Robert was talking about the possibility of cartoonists back in the day going into internment camps. Do you think that, what is the most trouble that you all ever got into with something you created? And do you think there is an underground movement today? Or is it
Well,
dead?
let me address that, then y'all can put in your 2 cents. The underground that we used to know just isn't anymore. It just isn't there. When we started doing underground comics, we were a group probably made up of malcontents and people that just didn't fit in society very well. And we were riding a social crest of anti-sociability. And I was known with the FBI for working for Ed Big Daddy Roth, being involved in Zap Comix and going to leftist meetings. I know I was because Roth had an FBI agent come down every week and talk to us. In 66, 67, 68, there was a real feeling that they were reconditioning those internment camps, and they were reconditioning for people that were causing trouble in society. And it seemed like if the war swung more to the right, and it looked like it was going to do it, they were going to start rounding up dissidents. And the Zap comic artists fell into this category of dissidents. See? Now, our knees were knocking. Now, people were going to jail for selling underground comics. The artists were very rarely ever touched. As I said earlier, it was that poor bastard that was at the newsstand at the desk right there, and maybe this went to the owner of the bookstore or the whatever. But there was a tremendous concern that we were going to be facing some kind of punitive action. It was a real concern. Roth's phone was tapped. I was up at Crumb's partying with him one Christmas, and I know his phone was tapped. You know, it was a concern. It was a concern, and it has passed. And it's impossible to explain to young people that I used to do funny books, and the government might have put me away. See, It's hard to explain to people that. And so when that situation's passed, underground comics kind of passed, they turn into alternative comic books. And alternative comic books are comic books that are just having a little trouble getting a big publisher and distributing. That's about the definition of it. Underground comics are outlaw comics. Alternative comic books are just people are just freelance artists that just can't seem to get a big publisher. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Anybody else want to chime in, or you haven't particularly had any kind of problems along those lines?
It was the same thing that Robert was talking. There was a Love and Rockets cover that I did that got a guy in trouble in South Africa. It was a pregnant woman with a drink on her belly, and she was smoking a cigarette. It was obviously a parody, right? It was obviously satire, but the guy got in trouble, and I think he lost his store and everything. But we didn't get, we don't get touched. He's the guy that he's selling this book that he believed in. He liked it, and he got a lot of crap for it. I met him, and sorry. I won't do it again.
And I got death threats for a strip I did. It was just a little political thing where George Bush, it's too hard to explain.
Well, I got death threats from feminists.
Oh. Well, Andrew Sullivan decided to read this strip in the worst possible light, and he got, basically attacking Salon.com because that's where he saw the strip. So it was just a wedge for him to get to Salon, and then a lot of yahoos wrote me and, made my life miserable for a week.
Robert, you dropped that little line there. Do you want to be? Was it about a specific comic book?
No, I guess it was me and S. Clay Wilson's whole body of work. I guess it seemed like the growth of the feminist movement started really getting strong in the early 70s. And I started getting a lot of resistance from female comic book artists, underground comic book artists, and then it started lapping over into regular feminists. And then when my album cover come out on Guns N' Roses, that Appetite for Destruction, and I was catching it in all directions. And it was kind of an irony, too, because I was very, very sympathetic with the women's movement, but it has plagued me up to this day. It's let off quite a bit. I was in that show, Helter Skelter, at MoCA in '92, and I got picketed and really slandered, and I was really the focal point of being the big bad white man that is inconsiderate to other people. And so I don't know. I guess that's a stigma that'll just kind of always hang with me. There's just recently a write-up in Art Forum, and they brought up that Helter Skelter thing, and they still bring that thing up.
Yeah, and actually, I thought that in the event that that subject came up, I thought I'd bring along a quote from an interview you did with the Comics Journal around the time of the Helter Skelter show. Now you have to imagine it's much more charming with his twang, but in answering, he was talking about how Robert was talking about how he worships women, and what he said was, he said, "In my twisted mind, a woman can do no fucking wrong, even when she attacks me. Even ugly fucking lesbians that come up and drive me nuts and hate my guts."
I said
see
something
fucking
like
virtue in
that. Yay.
Any more questions? Yeah, over there.
I'd like to thank all the panelists for being here tonight, but especially the brothers Hernandez, because your work has meant a lot to me these last 20 years. And if I could ask you to follow up on something someone else said earlier, how is it that you've come to create these deeply compelling three-dimensional portraits of women, and better than most novelists, and do it so successfully?
Sex change.
Yeah, give it a shot.
I don't know, just try, Gilbert came up with this theory after years and years of going, I don't know, I just draw them, that kind of thing, equal time, because our father died when we were very young, and we were raised by our mom, and we saw the world through her eyes, the way she handled the world and everything like that. So probably has a lot to do with it, You know, I work very organically, so it kind of just, it comes out of me, so I'm not really sure why, but I think that's a good guess. What do you think?
Yeah, what he said. And that gives us an excuse to draw women all the time. We'll just put the whatever the character's doing that story. If we draw a woman, it's more interesting, more fun to draw. That's all. Originally, that's what it was. And then it just became our way of thinking when we, to do a story.
Okay, maybe one last question? Anyone, or is that, okay, this will be our wrap-up.
I'd just like to ask what people's current projects are, from Robert on to Carol to the. My girlfriend had Love in the Rockets in the '80s. She had everyone you had, so I remember reading them. But I'd like to ask Robert and first and go on down what everybody's current projects are.
Excellent final question for everybody in the panel. Robert, any comic book plans at all?
What was the question?
Sorry. The question was current and future plans. So it's a good wrap-up question. Primarily you're working on paintings.
Yeah, I make my living as a outlaw painter, and I've done that for 40 years. I paint oil paintings, and I sell them to people that are weak enough to buy them, and have the money, and I've sustained myself for a long, long time, and I'm going to do that. And in fact, I have a magazine called Juxtapose that started in 1994. That's the second top art magazine on the stands with a circulation of 75,000, and it's soon to be the first art magazine. And I got some free copies up here if you want some, and that's what I do. I've brutally forced my way into the real art world, and I still have leanings in the comic book world. Like I mentioned earlier, it's been 50 years now that abstract expressionism and minimalism and conceptualism have dominated the arts, and it's very obvious that there's been going to be a big change. There's going to be a swing around to some form of representational expressionism, because the human race has been drawing pictures and painting on cave walls for 35,000 years, and you're not going to stop it with an art movement that started after the Second World War.
Okay, Carol?
I don't know what I'm going to do next.
Okay, now you've restarted Love and Rockets.
Yeah, and I'm still having a lot of fun with it. It's kind of like, we're young again and stuff like that, And I also got a job doing a one-page strip for the New York Times magazine, which I think Chris Ware's in it right now, and I'm one of the next guys or down the road. And I thought, well, years ago I would have said, what do I do? I'm going to be doing comics for people who don't even know what comics are. Oh no, oh my God. Now I just say, well, they wanted me, so they're going to get me. I'm just going to do what I do. And then
This is the funny pages section in the magazine. The Chris Ware's got about like 3 or 4 months of every week he's in there doing the strip.
Yeah.
And so after he wraps up in probably a month or two, they're going to start running your weekly.
I don't know if it's me or I'm after the next person. Yeah,
Okay.
It's like rotates, different artists every 12 to 16 weeks.
Okay.
And I just got the go today, and
All right.
I'm just gonna draw 11 rockets for the New York Times. And hopefully, and also hopefully get this movie thing going. But that's all I can say.
Gilbert?
Oh yeah, just continuing, my half of Love and Rockets, and I'm gonna try to emphasize on working on graphic novels, as we call them, original graphic novels that have beginning, middle, and end in that one package. Because normally my stuff is serialized, and I've serialized so much stuff that I don't know. It's a change. It'll be a change for me in the way I tell stories. because I've just never really done a long story in one package, and that's starting to feel good. I'm just finishing up one with DC Vertigo right now, called Sloth. I should be done with it in a couple of weeks, and
But since it's called Sloth, maybe more.
yeah, we'll see how it turns out, because it'll really be my official first graphic novel, and I like the feel of it, of working on something like that. So the only thing I'll be serializing, I guess, is with shorter strips will be Love and Rockets. I'm going to cut out the other stuff, and it'll be Love and Rockets, and then these books that hopefully, get into the bookstores and that kind of thing. And it'll be new for me, so I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, I'd like to thank the panel very much. Thank you all for your attention.